After Britain voted to leave the European Union 5 years ago, a group was set up to fight for the rights of EU citizens whose future in the UK suddenly seemed precarious. The campaigners chose a snappy name for their group, the 3 Million, the number of people from 27 EU countries who, it was believed, lived here. It seemed like a sensible figure to alight on. A couple of years later, the government said 3 was still pretty much the magic number. Maybe 3.5 million, though maybe a bit higher. But what ought those campaigners to have called their organisation, really? They do seem to need a rebranding. We know this because last week the deadline passed for EU citizens to apply to live here in the UK for what's known in the jargon as EU settled status. It permits a Pole, a Greek, a Slovakian, anyone from those 27 EU countries who is living here before the end of last year to remain permanently and, should they choose, go on to become a British citizen. So what was the number? Well, it certainly wasn't 3 million. By the end of March, 5.6 million had applied to live in the UK. Since then, stragglers have been applying at the rate of about 10,000 a day, so the figure is edging closer, ultimately perhaps to 6 million. The underestimate is the equivalent of 2 Birminghams by population, and that doesn't include those who, for whatever reason, live here already but haven't decided to make their stay official. They'll lose the right, by the way, to work and claim benefits. Our nation's statistical guesswork has turned out to be comically, prodigiously inept. If individuals submitting their tax return got numbers this wrong, they'd be facing a punitive fine or worse. Take the number of Romanians and Bulgarians who've applied to stay on. The Office for National Statistics thought there were about 500,000 combined, but in fact the number to have applications approved is well over double that. This isn't necessarily a bad news story. After 17 years of not having to, EU nationals have chosen to commit their futures to the UK, despite, as the saying goes, despite Brexit. For all you may have heard or hear about shortages of bar staff or hotel cleaners or fruit pickers, or the COVID effect, Brexit has locked in these immigrants in numbers that could not have been, and clearly were not, ever imagined. The system isn't working. Before settled status forced people to make a measurable choice, we relied blindly, as it turned out, on surveys at ports and national insurance numbers. Now we know that 1 in 5 Londoners is an EU national. In Wolverhampton, applications for settled status were 80% higher than anticipated. 5 million applications came from England, 250,000 from Scotland, and about 90,000 each from Wales and Northern Ireland. But the bigger question is about our ability to know how many people are living in the UK. Our population has grown by something like 10 million since the turn of the century, much of that growth caused by immigration from within and without the EU. But if we can undercount the numbers of EU citizens living here by a third, might we face a similar problem with those who've moved here from other parts of the world? How can any nation plan to provide all the schools, doctors' surgeries and roads it needs if it has no idea how many people are actually living here? Well, we're joined now by Harjap Singh Bhangal, immigration lawyer, and Samuel Armstrong, Director of Communication at the Henry Jackson Society. Gentlemen, thanks both very much for giving up some of your time this evening. Harjap, if we can start with you. As I told the story of the data there, it does look like junk, our data. How did we get here?
We got here because every year we have a select committee report about the Home Office, which clearly tells us it's not fit for purpose. So it's telling us this machinery is not good, it's not worth the paper it's written on, so it's absolutely not viable. What do? We should throw it away and build a new one, or knock the wall down and build a new one. Instead, what we try and do is paint over the cracks, no matter who the Home Secretary is, and pretend everything's all right. And this is just an example of how the Home Office is inept, how they do get decisions wrong and their estimates wrong, and the fact that we don't have the controls about people entering and exiting that we think we do. If you imagine, or if you remember the last time you went to an airport, when you exit the UK, there's actually no immigration. So there's no one counting how many people are going out or whether the people have come in have gone out. Only now has it been announced that perhaps we're going to introduce exit controls as well, so we can keep an eye on this. But it's too little too late, isn't it?
Yeah, just on the point about, the Home Office not being fit for purpose, they've got a backlog currently of 400,000 people, EU citizens, who've applied for settled status in the UK. It's not an option. We've got to work with what we have.
Yeah, I mean, we really need to streamline the process. We've been saying it for years, and this isn't the first case. Think of the asylum backlog, which often we've talked about in the past, or we always talk about, lawyers always talk about any applications taking. We've had marriage applications, which is a simple one to decide. You can decide it in 2 hours. We've had them pending for 8 months. And that's not just because of COVID, that's just general standards. It shouldn't take 12 weeks to make a simple decision on an application which somebody can do in an hour. We've heard of gap year students being recruited to make these decisions. So what is going on?
Sam Armstrong, what is going on, particularly around the data, which does look so duff?
Well, look, the one thing that opponents of immigration and supporters of immigration agree on is that the Home Office does a very bad job of processing immigration. Both sides are thoroughly unhappy with it. What I think this data shows most clearly, though, is actually the British public, who for a long time were derided and mocked for saying, actually, no, immigration is much higher than you are saying it ever was. They were called conspiracy theorists and a number of other things, were all right from the start. The numbers they had in their mind, their ordinary daily experience, got it very right. What I would say, though, to agree with you, Colin, is that actually, the contrary to what groups like 3 Million were saying, is actually what the UK has done is come up with a very, very generous scheme. No one can say that this EU settled scheme was anything other than probably the most generous form of immigration naturalisation ever attempted in the world. And I actually think, as someone who's can see the positives of immigration, that it's something that, despite all the chuntering about Britain being a racist country, is something that we can all feel really very proud about.
Harjap, what we don't know is how many of those granted settled status will pursue this and become British citizens.
A lot of countries, EU countries, allow dual citizenship. So it's in their benefit for people to get dual citizenship. If I could get dual citizenship, say the USA, I would. There's no reason why I wouldn't do that.
In the run-up to the Brexit vote, people were trying to get passports for other European countries, weren't they?
And Ireland is a big example of that. People, even British citizens, were looking at their Irish ancestry and applying for Irish applications. In fact, they saw a rise of almost about 80, 90% in applications, generally from British people. So, yeah, I mean, a lot of people will take the offer up and eventually, as they're allowed to, become British citizens, and British citizens will do likewise in the EU. We've got a lot of people now who are applying for Spanish nationality or Portuguese nationality, British people likewise. But I do agree the scheme has been very generous, and there's been a lot of time, and there's been a lot of successful applications. And also for people who've missed the deadline, the government has come out and said, well, actually, we're not going to...
28 days.
Yeah, we'll serve them a notice if we ever come across them. But even people can still apply to this day. So late applications are allowed as long as you have a reason as to say, well, why we wasn't. And it's very unlikely that they will be refused.
Sam, for some people, this is an abstract conversation we're having. It doesn't really sit in the real world, but actually it does, doesn't it? And you've already indicated to this effect. If you are at a council, if you're in central government, you're trying to plan for the future, you're thinking about where the roads need to go, where the schools need to go, the hospitals, etc., and you're planning for this many, and you get this many, it's a total nightmare.
Yeah, we should be really clear about this. 3 million extra people in this country has real life consequences. It means queues for the NHS are longer. It means our classrooms are fuller, and it means public services have to be split more ways. So many people will rightly be concerned that the government could have got this quite so wrong. I have to say, 3 million to 6 million, almost double, does suggest to me that actually the public are going to see somewhat diminished services over the next few years. But it actually paints a picture of something that we've all known for a very long time, that almost no political party in this country will speak about, which is there are millions of people in this country that live in a sort of shadow state. They are not registered with the system. They don't go to the doctors. They aren't on the HMRC databases. They frankly don't interact with the state at all. That concerns me, because within that there will be modern day slaves, within that there will be grotesque abuses, and there will be people here who are dangerous.
Some would say grant them an amnesty, let them go straight. They're here, they can't be removed. Let's bring them in the tent.
Well, my view on an amnesty is very clear. We can talk about an amnesty after we have sealed the borders. You only needed to look at the footage today on the English South Coast to realise we haven't sealed our borders yet. What we're not talking about is an amnesty of stuff that's gone on in the past. Were we to declare an amnesty, we would essentially be encouraging the greatest transfer across the channel ever seen, we would see hundreds of individuals drown in bad weather, all in an attempt to get into the UK. And amnesty is about the most dangerous thing that we can attempt. But what this data shows is actually, contrary to what politicians might say, there are simply millions of people, at the best case at all, hundreds of thousands, that we simply have no idea are even here.
Harjap, you're at the sharp end, as an immigration lawyer. Can you speak to that point? I mean, when the government gets things, and the statistical arm of government gets things this badly wrong, it's massively corrosive for public trust in the ability of the government to work out what's happening all around us. Is that your experience? Do they have a clue?
The government can't say we've got our finger on the pulse, or we've got our eye on the ball when it does get things wrong. And as Sam said, one thing that everyone agrees on is that the Home Office is not fit for purpose. So until the government actually prove that they've got someone in charge who can actually run a good ship, or that in fact the ship isn't full of holes, and the trust is going to be eroded. And the other thing is about the pressure on services. We've got to understand that the 6 million or odd so Europeans that are here, they're going to be paying added tax as well. And it's up to the government to use that tax money to then, increase services. Reports show that 4% of migrants take benefits as opposed to 14% of British people. So, that's a big myth busted there. The Europeans are working, they are paying tax. Surely it's up to the government to realise, well, if there's pressure on our services, let's increase the number of schools, let's increase the number of hospitals, let's increase the number of
What do you say to Sam's point, which is essentially, look, we can be really liberal about the people who've come here, have an amnesty, all the rest of it, but what you've got to do is win back the public's trust to make sure the borders are hard. We talk about leadership at the Home Office. Priti Patel, in the last week alone, week and a half, has said, let's have, with the Danish, some sort of processing centre in Rwanda for people to go to. You may scoff, but people like the idea. They like the idea of sending people to
sure they do.
They also like her idea that says, let's actually, anybody who comes onto a beach in Kent, off a boat, trafficked there by illegally, should be treated as a criminal.
And not jail them for 4 years.
Up to 4 years.
Yeah, but is that going to work practically? Let me tell you my personal experience. When I started immigration law in 2001, on New Year's Eve, I got a phone call saying there's 52 people have landed at Dover and they're going to be processed. They need assistance. So that was in 2001. Nothing has changed. The numbers haven't changed. It's just there's more focus on it. Now, are we really saying that in 20 years, these people traffickers, they use the same routes, the same boats, same methods, same gangs, and we haven't
the methods have changed a little bit.
But we haven't caught them. So
we've got some smuggling the backs of the lorries. Sam Armstrong, final point. We're going back to the early 2000s. I remember standing in Budapest in 2004. The EU 10 accession countries were joining. Home Office at the time was saying maybe 13,000 of them will come to the UK. It ended up being hundreds and hundreds of thousands. In a sense, Harjap's right, isn't it? We haven't got this right in terms of projecting numbers for decades.
Well, that's right. And I think the remarkable thing about the Home Office is just how badly it has got right how attractive Britain is. The Home Office must be the least patriotic department in the British government. Every time it assumes that people don't want to come here, there's plenty of other well-developed places that they want to come to. In fact, the UK is extremely attractive for overseas immigrants. And until you deal with something to make it so unpleasant, you're going to keep having the flow. Now, we're absolutely right to say this has been going on for a very long time. Australia was in exactly the right situation.
Save that story for another time. We've got to leave it there. Sam and Harjap, thanks both very much for coming in.